Hello, 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 it's Cello Ben, and it is time for another video. Today I'm really excited because we, in the Jacksonville Symphony, just finished our season partway through last month, and one of the things on the program was a piece that is so popular among concert goers, students, professionals, music history teachers, everybody in the classical world, and that is Berlioz's Symphonie Fantastique. Now, this is one of those things that's sort of a gap in, or was sort of a gap in the repertoire for me. It's so mega popular, but I had actually never played it until this point in my career. And I had a great deal of fun with it, but I also know that it presents an enormous amount of challenges. He was not nice to us. No, he was not. So let's dig in and see if I can make your lives a little bit easier if you're playing this piece. Now, first thing I want to mention, this piece has a lot of notes, and my goal here is not just to, take you through how to woodshed things. The things that you just need to get under your fingers, well, you just need to do the work and get them under your fingers. My goal here is to talk about the things that are unusual and that maybe you haven't encountered before. This piece is unbelievably wild in so many ways, and probably the biggest way is that it's so old. It sounds so fresh and so new, and the orchestra is so big. You know, Berlioz was born during Beethoven's lifetime. He was born just 12 years after Mozart died. But bro's over here going full-on Mahler with his orchestration, giant orchestra and offstage oboe and offstage bell and Colenio. And I think that's really one of the big reasons that this piece is viewed as such an absolute revolution. So, let's dig in. First thing to note, a little bit before rehearsal number 3, is we have these 30-second notes, but they're not necessarily always going to be done that way. Sometimes it'll be measured like this. And other times it might be just a tremolo. So you've got to make sure to check with the other folks in the orchestra which one it's going to be. It's a bit tougher if you're doing it measured, but it can be done. You're going to have some duple against triple stuff going on with the flutes and the clarinets. Yeah, clarinets. But it's doable. When we did it tremolo, but again, it's just up to the powers that be of your orchestra. And if you are part of the powers that be, then be ready to be part of a decision-making process on that. Now, before figure 5, we have a really, really long held note. It literally is probably held for about a minute. I'd like to encourage you to get to know this passage well enough that you don't have to count it. If you're literally just counting 1 and 2 and 3, you're going to be pretty miserable, and it's such a long period that you very well may get lost. So get to know what's going on in the rest of the orchestra there. It'll let you have your mind a bit more at ease while you're holding that long A flat and generally just contribute to a better playing experience. Now we come to the tough stuff in the exposition after figure 5. This driving motor that we have so often. I was quite scared of it when I was preparing this piece and playing along with the recording. It was so hard to keep up and know exactly where I was, especially later in the movement. But I realized one trick that I noticed my colleagues doing, and that's what made all the difference for me, which is use essentially no bow and do not leave the string. It's so rhythmically difficult that we require just the most incredible possible economy of motion in this. It's all well and good when it's on the downbeats, but when we get to figure 11 right after that, we can't afford to mess with the timing or anything with these offbeats. Especially with the chelo. Find the most comfortable part of your bow that's easy to play in. Keep your eyes glued to the principal and the conductor. If you are the principal, and this is good knowledge if you're not the principal too, just realize that the violins are on the downbeats. So it's a chaotic passage for sure, but the good news is having a great economy of motion can help a lot with it. Now, besides that wild syncopation, this movement is pretty straightforward except for just needing to do some woodshedding. But I will mention these swells that we have after figure 16. I think in general, within the realm of good taste, it's important to really try and get that lurchy feeling of the dynamics going. Especially when we get into the diminution. So I think one of the things that's going to help a lot is making sure that the diminuendos always happen quickly and truly, all the way to a nicely soft dynamic. And then for the 2 hairpin crescendi in a row that we have in places like this, for my taste at least, the first one should be a little bit less intense than the second one. Now, I don't know what your section's bowing is going to be, but in general, I think then the first one can use a little bit less bow, and then you can blossom the sound on the subsequent bow. This is definitely how I had to think about it in order to, well, make it come out that way. Now, besides these couple of little things, this movement is mainly woodshedding. Just learning the notes well and getting them under your finger like you would practice any other passage work. So let's move on to the second movement, where we enter the most elegant of parties. And I'd actually like to start right where we come in, because this, if I sing it a little bit under tempo, I can get all the notes. But in the real context, it might be a little bit too fast, and it can cause a lot of tension in the wrist if you're really trying to... So I think you should at least start this very, very tosto, and don't try too hard to get every single note, just try for the gesture. Kind of shaggy and indistinct. Obviously, once you get to the sforzando, then maybe a little bit more decidedly accurate, but until then, I think there's a little bit of freedom to pay more attention to the gesture than the exact number of notes. Of course, same goes for subsequent times that this figure appears. Now, after figure 23, when we get to this, if your bowing that you're doing is down, up, 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 I think you can afford to use quite a bit of bow then for those first 2 notes of each bar. You have plenty of room then after that to do 4 up bow staccato notes while feeling spacious. Now take a look here right before figure 26. This is absolutely wild notation, but I don't want you to get scared of it, because in reality all it is 4/16 notes. Bup, 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 bup. I think the only reason that he added this 30-second note and then rest each time is just because he wanted to emphasize really, really, really play this short. But I'm pretty sure you were going to do that anyway with the staccato marks. Now, when we hit figure 27, I think this stuff is best done very close to the tip. It helps it be elegant, and very little from the arm, just all fingers. Take a look. Now, after this, we're pretty straightforward for a while. But before 35, take a look at these. These tremolo-looking markings, I think, should be measured. Obviously, that may be a question to bring up to the principal or the conductor or whatever, but I would assume measured, especially because if you look down here in the violin part, we see a distinct change and then 4 actually notated 30-second notes. I'm not sure if the same thing applies here at the confuoco, but there is an important thing that I want to address here. Namely, a few bars before 36, when we have these 8th notes followed by a quarter note sforzando. It's very hard to do in context if you're just doing it as written. So I propose taking just like a microsecond off of that 8th note, so that you can reset for the sforzando every time. All right, and now after 36 in this animato, it's probably going to go a lot faster than that. I just can't sing that fast. So this is about how it'll probably go. So that begs the question then, how do we manage that? And the method that I found to be the best for me to actually be able to do it correctly in context is to think of it in groups of threes. And obviously you don't want to accent it like that, but if you actually think of it in groups of threes like that, I think it'll help you a lot to really be with everybody else, especially because if you look here, the violins come in exactly halfway through the bar. So that is in itself a group of three. So instead of it's a little thing, but it may make a pretty big psychological difference when you're playing this in context. All right, third movement. It's, again, quite straightforward for a while, but let's look here after figure 40. These 16th notes should definitely be measured. And then after that, we get these 32nd notes, but they may be marked in your part with a shorthand that looks kind of tremolo-y. However, they are going to be measured. And shortly after that is another kind of scary-looking rhythm that's actually not as bad as it seems. So right at 41, you're tied over. 1, 2. Ba-dum, ba-da-dum, ba-dum, bum, bum. Just kind of a little snap. Ba-dum, ba-da-dum, ba-dum, ba-da-dum. And even though that figure comes later in various different parts of bars, it's the same thing until we get down to the poco animato. Ba-dum, ba-da-dum. Triplets, but again, same idea. Make sure you really exaggerate the dynamics here too. Once you get to the fourth bar of 42, this should be finally a spot where you can just do an unmeasured tremolo. Honestly, one of the biggest challenges of this movement is just dealing with super small note values for something that's counted in eighth notes and not tricking yourself into half timing or double timing anything or whatever it may be. But overall, this movement is relatively straightforward, and I know that you will do a phenomenal job with it. Let's move on to the fourth, the march to the scaffold. First thing, this first note is fine when you start the movement, but there's a repeat, and it's coming right off of arco. So I'll recommend that when you repeat back to that first G, you do it with a left-hand pizz. Now, after 50 here, we get to a wonderful cello moment. Bum, ba da da ba ba bum. One thing that's really important here is paying attention to what's full value and legato and what's staccato. Bum, bum, ba, 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 bum. Now things get a little bit tricky at figure 54 here, but really, you need to woodshed it and have a good fingering. And the fingering that I chose is this. Let me show you in slow-mo, and maybe it'll help you. I'm releasing it into the public domain for your use. Although I don't even know if I have authority to do that, because I'm sure I'm not the only one who's ever used this fingering. And similar material a few bars later. And then once it converts to 16th notes, we need to be careful to really use tiny bits of bow, because this paradigm of two slurred, two separate at this kind of tempo can cause problems if we don't. All right, 56. Very classic Berlioz-y thing, I think. I experimented for a while with what to do here, because one option that can be pretty clean is thumb. And then I realized that just doing 1, 1, 3, 4 as a general rule was going to work out really well. I think Berlioz is going for whoosh, 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 as opposed to ba-da-dum, ba-da-da-dum. Like, he's not writing the Addams Family theme. He's writing Symphonie Fantastique. And I think of fingering like this, with just 1, 1, 3, 4 all the way, except for when you go to the open G, can do wonders. Now, 57, similar material to the beginning, but be extra careful to pay attention to the note values and articulations, because they're different than the first time around. Take a listen to the first time and the second time. Now, shortly after this, once we get to the make sure that no matter which bowing the section is using, you're being economical once again. Because if you're trying, you're going to have to leave one of your arms on stage after the concert. We don't want that. You can use plenty of weight from the right arm, and you can also trust that the section together, especially because this is all the strings playing these figures together, you can trust that there's going to be plenty of sound. You don't have to overexert it. And if you do overexert it, you're, number one, risking injury, but also you're risking dragging. So really stay compact there, like this. Okay, fifth movement, The Witch's Sabbath. When we first come in, it's kind of an odd vibe because it's a sextuplet, but missing the last note. Now, you could think of it as ba-da-da-da-dum-bum, and that's one valid way to think about it, but the way that made it easier for me in context was to think in threes. Scooby-Dooby-Doo. After this, there's some stuff we need to woodshed, but you know how to do that. I trust you. And after 63, when we come in with Scooby-Dooby-Dooby, this is another spot where we need so much economy of motion. Just tiny bow strokes. Also, you want to figure out which string you want your elbow to favor for this. For example, in the first iteration, Do, Mi, Sol. Do you want to keep it a little bit high so that it's easy to get to the D string with the wrist? Or do you want to keep it a little bit low so that it's easier to stay on the G string with the wrist? I recommend setting up the elbow in this passage to favor whichever is the higher string in each figure. That way, you can just pop over easily with the wrist, and then you won't have to expend quite as much energy. Take a look. Now, after 64, when we finish up this figuration and we get to the... Sorry, I cannot sing these. I'm not exactly a virtuosic baritone. Anyway, I just wanted to say that I recommend, for clarity's sake, that you start these on thumb. It is possible to do 1, 1, 2, 4, 2, 1, 1, 1, 2, 4, 2, 1. But if you can make thumb happen, it makes it all right there. There's a little bit of stretching to do as you get up to third finger, but it's what I ended up doing in performance, and I think it worked really well for me. All right, figure 68. This is a favorite of a lot of people, I think, where we have these just really quick eighth rest and then ba, 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 oopa. It's absolutely jamming. And the way that I recommend approaching it so that you stay in time is, number one, be subdividing the whole time. So you're thinking, but also, I think, especially since we have this diminuendo de piano, you can let the very end of it go each time so that you can reset. Almost maybe an eighth note early. Maybe not quite that much, but here's how I did it, and it worked really well in context. Okay, figure 80. This is tough. It starts out as some orchestra-wide syncopation, and it's fine for a little while. But shortly thereafter, the brass come in. Now, while you're syncopating and the rest of the strings are syncopating, they come in on downbeats. Now, luckily, of course, brass instruments are renowned generally for being quite soft and subdued, so it shouldn't cause it. Wait a minute. Yeah. Watch the concertmaster and just keep subdividing your internal pulse and staying in time. This is something that's really valuable to do with a metronome because the metronome will be your brass players. It'll be right on the beat and then you can play off of it. Bop, 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 bop. And the last thing I want to mention for now is right around figure 83 because TBH, this scared me for a while and it ended up being fine. So let me tell you how I approached it. First of all, I guess the theme of this video is economy of motion. Then again, that's a good theme for cello playing in general. But it was particularly important to apply here as well. And actually, it's not only about how much we move, but how many times we move. My tongue is going to fall out of my mouth if I keep doing this. So here's my suggestion. For these first two half notes here, play them regularly with the trills. After that, though, even if it's a dotted quarter, only do one turn. If you can keep it to one turn per written trill after those two half notes, it's going to make your job a lot easier. Also, make sure that the trills are on the beat instead of treating the little turn like grace notes. That'll help you be with the rest of the section. And the other tip I'll give is to generally start these trills whenever possible on first finger. Here's the fingering that I used. If you happen to miss one of the trills, the world will not end. The more important thing is that you stay on that train and keep going. And my friends, that is Symphonie Fantastique. I've been filming this for like an hour. I don't know how much of this is actually going to end up in the final video, but I hope that this serves at least as a good introduction to this piece if you're working on it, especially for the first time. I know I didn't cover everything in here. You know, the piece itself is like an hour long. But I am more than willing to be here as a resource to people who are playing this piece or other pieces, of course. So if there's anything that I missed that you want me to let you know how to do or how I did, let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, I hope you will consider giving a like and a sub. Last thing before we go, the Cello Ben studio is open again, and I'm offering online lessons to cellists all over the world. Whether you're in Topeka, Tripoli, Tashkent, or anywhere else on this wonderful planet, I would love to hear from you. You can schedule a free 30-minute trial lesson at celloben.as.me. And if you're an adult beginner cellist who prefers self-paced learning, my online course is available at celloben.com/course, where you'll not only have access to hours and hours of video lectures, a custom method book, and recordings to play along to, but you'll also have unlimited access to asking me questions and sending me videos to get feedback. And with that, I hope you have a beautiful rest of your day, and I can't wait to see you in the next video. Bye for now.